Excellent. Got it. Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, we are, like Sarah said, we have an ambitious agenda. We have a lot of topics to cover. And so I do want to mention that about a year ago, we hosted some public meetings virtually, had a public comment period on water management plan for the refuge. And during that comment period, we got some wonderful comments. And one of those comments asked that regional water management studies that the plan calls for, that we give an opportunity for some of those studies to get a little bit further down the road before we finalize the water management plan. And so we took that comment seriously. And so we are pausing on finalizing the water management plan to let some studies that were just getting underway get a little bit further down the road. And we're going to be talking about two of those studies this evening as part of this presentation. We're going to start, though, with a project update from Chris Bass with Chris Bass Engineering. And several years ago, a farmer recommended that we consider looking at what a weir design would look like in terms of reducing the peak flow of water through a structure and downstream. And so Chris Bass has been working on that study and has an update tonight as he wraps up that study on what the benefit of that look like. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Chris.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm hoping that you can see a slideshow, a PowerPoint, and that you can hear me. Is that a yes?
Hear you, Chris.
Okay, great. So I'm here to basically give an update or two on some work that has recently been finished at the refuge and some work that is just being started. And our company has, we've been working at the refuge pretty regularly for the past 5 years, and we've done a decent amount of work on, I don't know, just different things. Hydrology studies, water table management, advice, calculations, drainage. Most of it has to do with trying to answer questions that have come from the community, questions that are being asked by the refuge, and trying to help them sort of optimize their water management, meet the goals of the refuge, and at the same time try to be a good neighbor. And we've done a lot of different things. We've done a lot of water level overlays, calculations of water depth, a lot of stuff with terrain and water table management. And I know a variety of you have seen me speak on these things before or read some of our reports on those topics. And today, I want to sort of like update you on a project that it kind of came in phases. It sort of came out of these other meetings that we had, which has to do with the idea of managing the water control structures, configuring them in a way so that you could maximize water storage on the refuge and reduce the peak flows of water and thereby the flooding downstream. This study is focused on an area that's called Restoration Area 1. And if you look at the picture here, largely the land that you see in the picture is what makes up that Restoration Area 1. It's east of Pungo Lake, south of Phelps Lake, and is basically bordered by the canals Allen, Borma, Clayton, and Dehogue. The idea here is to take the water control structures and sort of modify the way that they're configured. And the picture on the left is an example of an existing water control structure in a more, I'm just going to call it a traditional configuration. And when you look at these structures, the way they work is they're installed in a canal, and you put boards into the slots. And if you look at what you see in the picture here are two structures side by side. Each one has 3 bays that can be fitted with what's called riser boards. And the boards are adjustable, and you use them to sort of control the water level in the canal. And what you'll notice about this picture on the left is that all the boards are set to about the same height. And what that does for you, or what that creates, is a condition where when it rains and the canal starts to flow, the water can flow right over the boards and out. And the sort of the problem with that is that it doesn't give you any capability of really slowing the water down or storing some of the water on the landscape. The photo in the right is an example of a modified setup that we've been using in our experiment. And what you'll notice is that there's one bay where the boards are quite a bit lower than the others. And what that does is it creates a water level that's a little lower than what you normally expect. But when you have a storm, we can store the water all the way up to the top of the boards that you see in the other bays. And because the opening there is small, it helps to throttle or pinch down the water that's leaving through that structure. And the theory, or the idea here, is that that will provide flow benefits downstream and help reduce flooding. Well, we just completed a 2-year-long experiment in partnership with Fish and Wildlife and the Nature Conservancy to measure this setup, to try it in a couple of different configurations and figure out just how much benefits we could get from it. And I'm just going to skip to the results. The short version is that the results are just really promising and really encouraging. When we just take one of these water control structures and set it up this way, we're seeing a substantial reduction in the peak flow, the flow rate of water downstream. If we add boards on the sides and put even more storage, then we're further multiplying that reduction benefit. And then if we do more than one structure on the same canal, which most of the main canals at Pocosin Lakes have 5 or more structures on them. But if we do 2 of these in a row, then we even further multiply the benefits. And what you see here in the pictures is sort of like an image of the water being pinched and flowing through the single bay opening after a rain event. And on the left, you see a graph of flow rates that were measured on the orange is sort of the more traditional setup, and the blue is the modified or experimental setup. And it's pretty easy to see the benefits of this and imagine what the benefits of this could be to people who are farming downstream. I think Yeah, I think that's the sort of the last slide for this summary. Oh, I wanted to say, we're going to I'm going to stop for a second and sort of answer questions, but what we're, a natural thing is to say, well, okay, well, what are we going to do with this? Well, right now we are sort of talking with Fish and Wildlife Service about what's next with this sort of setup. And, my advice has been, look, we should probably be doing this in more places. So right now we only did this really in 2 to 3 places. And what we would like to do is probably expand this sort of setup to other canals and other water control structures within the refuge. But we want to be very intentional about how we do that and make sure that we are speaking with the stakeholders downstream before we do it. And with that, I'll probably just stop and swing it back to Rebecca, and maybe I'll look at the chat and see if there's any questions coming in about that.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'll jump in as folks are thinking about questions or comments or thoughts on the WEIR project, and just say this is one topic that we definitely want to follow up with folks in person to discuss and gauge interest and think about where some potential sites for them for doing this in additional places would be, and make sure that that's something that folks would be interested in. And so we'll definitely be reaching out to the folks who are downstream of the canals where we would even be discussing doing this, which are primarily in Restoration Area 1, I think all in Restoration Area 1 for now. And just have that conversation as we start thinking about where else this might be appropriate to look at to try to realize some of those increased reductions in flow rates that this study has demonstrated. And then, Luke, it looks like we're getting some questions. Do you want to moderate the questions there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is from Rod Garganis. Is the setup flowing into the canal on Evans Road? And then I guess a comment to follow. It was pretty high yesterday with a few reports of field ditches overflowing into some cornfields.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
You can take that one, Wendy. That's fine.
No, I was just going to say, I went out and met with one of the landowners this morning about that particular structure on Evans Road. And I just mentioned to him about this WEIR study and Chris's final report and the results, and that potentially could be another location to install one of these WEIRs. But the direct answer to your question is this WEIR setup is not installed at that particular structure at this time, because we were doing this study first to determine the effectiveness.
Thank you for your
The experimental structure setups are on Borma and Clayton canals. We have sort of, those are the only canals where we've made any changes so far.
And also, I just wanted to add, and Chris may have already mentioned this, is the WEIR idea came from a local landowner. He approached the refuge and asked if he thought that this may work or should we try it. And Chris has conducted this study and it's been very effective, as you have already seen. And one other thing I want to point out is Chris and I several months ago went down to talk to a couple other farmers to the south of the Pungo unit, and we introduced this idea in the Allen Road Canal. The landowners south of the Pungo unit that would benefit from this were very interested in us putting in a couple weirs in that canal. We had to replace a damaged structure. We just recently finished doing that. And so we have the elevations and the numbers to set these weirs up appropriately. And we're getting ready to go out there and do that, and just to monitor those effects.
And we have another question for Chris from Jalen Waters. What is the mitigation plan for times when we would have more frequent storms? Is this being thought about? Because we often have hurricanes / storms back to back.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad someone brought that up. That's definitely on our mind, and over the time of the study, we have measured a few storms that happen like that. It covers basically the last 2 years. So we have had we had a hurricane, I think, come through during the monitoring period, and a tropical storm. So we've had a few big storms, and we have had some of those back-to-back storms. And what can happen is that when the water comes up in this single bay here, if you have a single event and that fills up, and then the water is coming down sort of slowly, and then you get another storm during that time, the water can come right back up and go over. And there is a sort of condition where what happens when that happens is that the benefits are reduced. So you don't get the same benefit, you don't get the same reduction, but the numbers that I'm showing you incorporate the whole period of time. So it does incorporate times when we have those two, like, storms that come back to back. We are still seeing reductions in the peaks, but those reductions are smaller than when you just get single storms. One of the things that could be done is to adjust the size of the opening. So for this study, we mainly just did sort of one bay, and we kind of did them all the same. But if we did 2 bays, or if we made the hole a little bigger, then the water could come down a little bit faster. But what we would want to do is do that sort of carefully, so that we didn't unintentionally let the water out so fast that it caused a problem downstream. And I think Chad, he's asking about are you asking about the 2 structures that are in the graph, or in the, yeah. The contributing area is not totally the same, but they're about as close as we can get them out on the refuge. So those 2 sites in theory are draining almost the same number of blocks within 1 block of each other, if that makes sense. However, what we find is that even if they have the same area, that the flow varies quite a bit at the 2 sites. And we have a lot of details about how we normalize the flow between the sites so that we could come up with the right reductions. And we have a more lengthy report on this study, and we have a longer presentation on this summary that dives into some of the mathematical details that you might be interested in.
So we have another question from Carl. Is the modified drainage hydrology advantageous to the refuge?
Oh yeah, I like that question. One of the things I didn't include here was, the philosophy behind this is to create storage. And what we're doing is we're creating storage across the land of the refuge to provide this peak flow benefit. And really, I don't know that it's an advantage, but there was a question from the refuge about whether it could be harmful. And really what biologists and ecologists are worried about is storing too much water and having it there for a long enough time that it starts to affect vegetation or habitat. So one of the things we did with this study was we also monitored groundwater levels and ponding out in the various blocks. And I didn't include a slide on it, but there is some data on that. And although we did show increases in how long water was on the ground or above the ground, it was relatively small. The differences were somewhat subtle, and most people seem to agree that it would not be harmful. Are there ways that it might be an advantage, or it might be somewhat of an improvement? I'm not sure. Those are things that would be maybe interesting to think about.
Another question from Rod. Has there been any corresponding study to measure the benefit of this system downstream, i.e. on farmers, flow, water levels in the canals and ditches, etc.?
No, I would say the answer is no. We don't have any monitoring equipment that is on private property. All the monitoring we're doing is on the refuge. One or two of these sites is right on the border of the refuge, so the water that's leaving the riser is flowing down into the, directly onto the canals that flow through the farms. But we don't have any measurements directly down there.
I also just wanted to add, in addition, we don't want to see wetland conversion or significant changes in the vegetation because, our main objective is wildlife habitat. But another big objective is we need to keep the peat soils wet to prevent ground fire during catastrophic wildfires. So that's very, very high priority. So it's a balance between that. And as those of you can remember, the Evans Road wildfire, Allen Road fire, when that fire gets down into the drier peat, it's just, it can be catastrophic. So I just also wanted to add that at that point.
Doesn't look like we have any other questions coming in at this time.
We can then move on to the next discussion, and Chris is going to present his Grassy Ridge study overview.
Yep, we can move on to the next agenda item. And if there are things that come up, feel free on either the WEIR demonstration or as we move on, feel free to go ahead and keep dropping them into the chat. And as we have time, we'll try to address everything, hopefully, all the questions or thoughts that you have. And so shifting a little bit, having just covered the work that the studies that we're doing on refuge and looking at whether there are opportunities on refuge to improve downstream conditions by reducing peak flow rates. We also, several years ago, Chris, did a study looking at impacts to flow on private lands downstream of the refuge. And one of the primary concerns I think that everyone expressed was that if only one or two people looked at improving system in their property, that it would not have the greatest benefit or may even be harmful to them. And so as an outflow of that, the Services Coastal Program funded this study that Chris is going to present on, which is really about looking across the landscape at opportunities to help improve flow for downstream landowners, and potentially looking if folks are interested at the conclusion of his evaluations, looking at what kind of funding opportunities might be available to realize some of these projects and get some of them implemented on the ground. And so with that, Chris, I will turn it back over to you.
Great. That was a great introduction. And yeah, so we have worked for a while mostly on the refuge, and I think, you know, some of the feedback that we've gotten, and we have fielded some questions that have to do with the canals downstream, and what we are wanting to do with this new study is sort of expand what we've done and work a little bit downstream in what we're calling the Grassy Ridge area, which is basically all farmland. It's all south of the refuge, and pretty much all the water from this restoration area 1 flows through this sort of complex system of canals that you see here. And what we're trying to do is sort of analyze this system, see if we can identify some pinch points or just some opportunities that might help make life a little bit better for these downstream communities. Now, one of the things that we have done leading up to this is a canal analysis of these canals. And what we're wanting to do here is to build onto that and just investigate a few different ideas with the goal of trying to reduce flooding and just improve the sustainability of farms downstream. And we've been all out in the field, and we've been all over these canals. We've done a lot of cross sections. We've done a lot of analysis. We've got a lot of analysis started. And what we're trying to do now is try to advance that analysis to see what kind of ideas might result in some improvements. And these are pictures of a good number of the main canals, and you can see what they sort of look like. And this is just to give you an idea of what we're evaluating. So we're trying to come up with some, I would call them outside the box sort of ideas, and they might not really be outside the box ideas. They're ideas that have been around for a long time, but I think should be an important part of modern or future agricultural planning. We're looking at things that could be done actually on the farm. So we're researching and sort of evaluating whether we think there could be some benefits to innovative farming practices like conservation tillage or implementing controlled drainage. And then what we're also interested in are various solutions that would have to do with canals. And most people know about dredging, so we're going to look into dredging a little bit. We're also looking into new ways of routing the water, or whether reconfiguring the canals might make water move better. And then we're also evaluating an idea which is called two-stage canals. And that idea is sort of can be visualized in the photos on the right, or the images on the right, which involves modifying canals to give them more flood capacity. And the idea behind them is that you build little benches that you see here on this second stage, where the second stage lines are, that improve the flow capacity of canals. And we are evaluating all this stuff with a computer model. We're using actually a combination of two models to try to visualize and quantify the benefits of this. And we're just getting started with this analysis, so we are open to ideas or maybe techniques that we might be missing, but we're hopeful that we're going to land on something that might tell a compelling story of how we can improve farming and make it more resilient, and make life better for farms and for the refuge. And I do have one more slide, but this is probably a place to stop, and also maybe answer questions or take questions about this new study. But like I said, we are just kind of getting this one started, and so it's something to sort of follow and look forward to.
So there's a question from Rod, more so pertaining to the previous topic. No questions yet on the recent topic. He says, I understand the fire mitigation effort, but the efforts to hold water so high seems to be detrimental to wildlife sustainability on the refuge. It is hard to believe the refuge looked like it does now in its natural state. Not sure if Wendy or
Yeah.
I can go. Go ahead, Rebecca. Sorry.
I can start, and then Wendy, you fill in. Thanks, Rod. This is certainly, I think an issue that maybe we run into in terms of where folks understand clearly what we're trying to do on the road. Because we're not interested in holding water levels at a point where everything is wet across the block, or that is negative impacting wildlife, because this habitat is really important for wildlife and the plants that existed prior to ditching and draining, and that we want to have return on the landscape. And so we shared, I think early on, Luke shared a link to our USGS groundwater monitoring well. That part of the toolkit that we use to try to determine what water levels look like across a block. So it is easy standing particularly at the southwest corner of blocks in an area like Restoration Area 1 and visualize that entire block looks like it does on that southwest corner. But because of the rise that occurs in elevation across a block, what you see, and had a slide about this at the very beginning where he looked at our existing water management, what if we had water at the top of the board levels as they were set at the time of his modeling, what that water level would look like, what open water or standing water like across the block. And our intent really is to have the water level really changing over time based on evapotranspiration and rainfall, and certainly recognizing that it'll seasonally fluctuate as well. But we're interested in creating wetland conditions where the water level is within a foot of the surface, but not standing water across a block. And so very often, if you go to the northeast corner of the block, there are pine trees and it's much drier ground on that end. And so the goal in refuge management is not to hold an incredibly high water level that is essentially holding water across the block and out competing native vegetation or wildlife. It's very much to allow that wildlife and plant community to flourish. So I'll pause there, Wendy, if you wanted to add anything, or Chris too. Oh yeah, there's that visual.
So I think that's a good point, that it does not look like the way it did before it was logged and cleared and ditched. And that's because it's been logged and cleared and ditched. And that channelization is very effective at draining those peatlands. What we're trying to do is to mimic to the greatest extent possible the natural conditions and restore those ecosystem services, which provides water quality benefits. It does provide excellent wildlife habitat. And these peatland ecosystems, these Pocosins, they are a fire adapted ecosystem. The pond pines, they have serotinous cones, which means they're sticky, they're closed really tight. They require fire intense heat for those cones to open up and for regeneration to occur. So we need to be able to re-wet this peat so we can reintroduce reaction or prescribed fires into this ecosystem to help perpetuate this native vegetation. And one other thing I want to add in regards to wildlife, and I know as many of you all know, because you live in this area, but the Pocosin Lakes National Wildlife Refuge had the highest black bear density that was recorded in the literature back in 2003. And that black bear density, just opportunistic observations, it is still a very dense population, very dense deer population. Waterfowl habitat is abundant. So there is a lot of wildlife on the refuge. Herps in terms of turtles and amphibians, neotropical migratory birds, red cockaded woodpeckers, a lot of wildlife on the refuge.
Well, I'm certainly not going to add anything that's super meaningful, but the question that Rod asked is one that we have been asked a lot. And it is largely, to me, a problem of perception, which is when you go to Pocosin Lakes, what you do is you drive on the road. And when you're on the road, you can see the canal and you can see water. And it makes you think that the whole place is underwater. And it's just not. The pictures you see in this slide, the picture in the upper right is the light blue is where there's actually water. Everything else in that picture is not standing water. And there may be little pockets of water, but even when you see a lot of water from the road, the large portion of that block is not wet in the same way that you envision it.
So we have another question. Has any consideration to equipment trafficability been taken should lightning strike in the center of these blocks? All of that water makes access to fight these fires a little harder on already soft ground. I realize this is not the easiest to test, but it is something that can come up.
Sure, I'll be glad to respond, and then feel free, Wendy, also from your history with fire on the refuge to add in. Absolutely. This is something that we think about both at Pocosin Lakes and at Alligator River, where we have a similar ecosystem that we manage and a lot less roads and fire breaks and access points to get into those parts of the Alligator River Refuge. And so we do have all of our fire equipment is specialized, tracked to be able to get out into these ecosystem types and into these soil types, recognizing that there are just places that we can't get because we either don't have access via roads or places on both refuges that are just both in restored areas and in naturally occurring areas on both refuges. So particularly at Pocosin Lakes, in a way than the situation that we have at Alligator River, the canal and system actually is one of our primary firefighting tools. And so just before I arrived here in this position several years ago, I went down to a fire on the Okanokie and met a number of firefighters who had come up for, excuse me, fires like Paynes Bay and Evans Road fire. And they talked at length about how different it is to fight fire in Eastern North Carolina in comparison to a lot of places that they go out on fires out west, because it really is a water game. So most of our above ground fires can be managed using our existing road and fire break infrastructure. And, with burnout operations or other operations we can keep an above ground fire in a fairly contained area. Where we run into our most significant problems is when the soils are dry and combustible and the fire goes underground. And so fighting that fire is really less about, there's certainly equipment considerations for building line where we need to, and being able to put appropriate fire breaks between where the fire is and another area. So that still exists. But in the Evans Road fire in particular, there was a significant pumping component of fighting that fire where we had to move water up the hill to re-wet the soils to attempt to get the ground fire to go out. And that's really what leads to these fires burning as long as they do, is when that fire gets into the soil and attempts to get water into that soil are really challenging. Wendy, would you add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it beautifully.
And I'll just, Rod, I saw your follow-up and the comment about not seeing it all from the roads. So I would just offer, if there are folks, I know we have a few folks on the line tonight who are names I recognize, but I haven't had out on the refuge with me since I've gotten here, which was about 4 years ago. So please just know, we'd be glad to get out on the refuge with you. If there are some things that would be helpful or questions that you have, I think I have found that I best understand Pocosin Lakes by being out and standing in various points on the refuge and seeing things for myself. So we would welcome that opportunity for anybody who'd be interested. Just let us know.
This is Chris. I think I just had I think that kind of wraps up my slides and my talk. I did have sort of one more slide, but it really is kind of just a conclusion slide about just what a special place Pocosin Lakes is. A big part of my job has to do with wetland and wetland restoration work, and there isn't another place like it, really, in the United States. I think the people who live in this area, the people who work in this area, are just absolutely just as special and deserve to be commended. And I'd encourage all of you who are engaged in the work at Pocosin Lakes and the management of it to stay that way, and to and to also be patient. You know, we've been working out there for a few years now, and progress in this area and the data to support good decisions doesn't come easily. It takes time. And you know, some of the problems that have happened or things that happened in the past sometimes were done too quickly or without the right information. And I would just want to commend the refuge and really all of you for listening to this stuff and being open-minded about it, and making sure that we have the right info and the right support to make the best decisions out there.
Thank you, Chris. And continue, if other questions come up, don't hesitate to keep populating the chat, because I think I'm at the end. I am going to move on, and this will be a little bit of a briefer topic, just because it's not a Fish and Wildlife Service owned, but we want to, while we're talking with folks, we wanted to just make us aware that Washington and Terrell counties, in partnership with the Albemarle-Pamlico National Estuary Partnership, APNEP is the acronym that you may use, were successful in funding from the Department of Resources with the state to develop a collaborative approach for a hydrologic study and regional water management strategy for the Scuppernong system. And while the initial funding that they've gotten is very much in the geography of the Scuppernong, the intent of is really more the entire AP Peninsula. So the desire is, as this study first gets started and gets up and running, and as additional funding becomes available, to expand the geography to focus on other areas as well. And so just to give folks a sense, this is coming, Washington County working and letting a contract to get this up and running, but it really is a very stakeholder focused process. And so the approach would really include both public and private engagement, not only with conservation land managers, but also local communities, farmers, private landowners, other entities. And the outflow of this be the development of a regional water management study that's really informed by a hydrologic budget and hydrologic modeling. So really getting at the heart of kind of some of these questions about what's going on with water movement and water budgets in that Scuppernong system initially, and then what are some options that we have in partnership, collaborating with one another to try to, over the long term, make a difference in some of the threats that we're seeing from increased rainfall amounts, from storms pushing rivers and the sounds up higher and holding them higher and preventing water from being able to flow into them and things like that. So that's the intent of this. And I don't know if anybody, I can't pull up my participant list right now, so I don't know if anybody from APNEP wanted to add anything, but I know that as Washington County lets their contract, you're going to start hearing more about this, and we are very interested kind of as a collaboration in seeing this expanded to other geographies, so that, you know, really maybe one day this happens in watersheds kind of across the, and we have some of these opportunities to look more holistically. So I can pause. If somebody from APNEP is on and wanted to join, maybe drop something in the chat and Luke can unmute you. I can't see all of my. We're waiting there. I see. Oh, Jimmy. Okay. Rod, I do want to thank you for that comment. I do want to come back to that. Luke, would you unmute Jimmy for us?
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself just as hard as I could before I realized I couldn't do it. But Rebecca, you've done a good job in covering what we have been up to over the course of the past 18 months to 2 years. This was a project that originated when we were approached by the North Carolina Parks and Recreation folks, and it's sort of evolved from there to be much larger than what we originally had envisioned. And right now we're trying to work with counties that are very limited in their capacity, and they're all very stretched very thin. And so we're just right now we're waiting on some signatures to finalize the contract, so we can hopefully go ahead and get started as soon as possible.
Great, thank you, Jimmy. And I think this study really speaks, Rod, to your comment as well. You're absolutely right that we need more conversation, and the solutions to the issues that we're all facing on the AP require all of us to come to the table together. And so that's very much my focus and my interest for not just Pocosin Lakes, all of the refuges in our complex, but certainly Pocosin Lakes being a key piece of that. And we have a ton of opportunities. And I think, you know, as we meet and talk, there are a lot of funding opportunities that various entities are looking for in the resilience and adaptation realm, potentially in infrastructure, in a number of different arenas. And so I think coming together and really focusing on the things that we can do in collaboration and in partnership together is where we would best be spending our time. So that's what we're really interested in.
I also just wanted to point out that a lot of the research that's been conducted over the years on Pocosin Lakes has been a huge partnership effort with universities, the Nature Conservancy, Conservation Fund. I think I see Eric as one of the participants, and he has been instrumental in helping us just maintain some of the monitoring equipment and helping with some of the monitoring, and it's very much appreciated. If there aren't any additional questions for Rebecca, we can, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. We can move on. We have a few refuge updates, but just want to provide that opportunity if anyone has additional questions for Rebecca or for Jimmy. Okay, so I just have a few refuge updates, and the first is for a hurricane or storm preparations on the refuge. We are continuing to reach out and to communicate with the surrounding landowners and stakeholders through public media such as Facebook posts and emails about approaching storms. We are keeping an eye on conditions on the ground. We're monitoring that. We're also monitoring those 4 USGS ground well monitors, and Luke has added those links to the chat. We also monitor the NC Fireman site. That link is also on this chat. And these links are going to be emailed to everyone along with the link to the recording of this presentation tonight to all the participants, just for your reference. So, and if there's any additional questions that anybody has, we are continuing to reach out and meet with people on the ground and on site. And you are welcome to reach us through our emails or even call the refuge office. We will respond to your inquiries. I also wanted to remind everyone, I know you all have seen on the news that there are some very poor conditions out west in regards to wildfires, and most of our staff is out on details. So I just want to remind you all, if you need to get in touch with someone on the refuge, the best venues is myself, Sarah Toner, or Vanessa Cheney. Another update, go ahead.
Sorry, Wendy, we will include those contact information for you 3. That's particularly, we recognize that right ahead of storms, there will be, even as we're doing outreach, there will be things that come up or questions that folks have or things that folks want to get out and look at. And so just because we know that our staff is, we don't send everybody out all at once, but we will have folks kind of in and out. And so instead of you all trying to catch up with somebody who's in California, we know that you'll be able to reach Wendy, Sarah, and Vanessa. And so we'll include contact information in our follow-up email too.
And for people who want the most up-to-date current road conditions, we are updating, it's actually a voicemail machine in one of our offices in Columbia, and I've added that link also on this chat, and it'll be included in the email, but we're just providing updates on which roads are closed onto that particular extension. So you can call that number if you wanted to come out on Saturday morning and it had rained and you want to check at 11:30 p.m. Friday night, you can call that number and it will provide the latest road updates. And that leads to our next update is we have some road improvement work that is going to be starting next week. We're very excited about this. Those of you who have driven on the refuge over this past winter and driven South Lake Road, that's been a very popular road that many people get stuck on if it's wet. But we're going to be raising that road and graveling it. Another road we plan on making improvements on is Westlake Road. We're going to be replacing some of the culverts. We're going to be reshaping Allen Road and doing some culvert work on Seagoing Road. We anticipate, weather permitting, that this work should be completed by the end of October, but it's going to be weather permitted on that. Rebecca had touched base on that Scuppernong River study, and associated with that is a survey boundary that we were completing around the Rattler Track, which is the northern part of the refuge just east of Lake Phelps. And we are completing that survey. We should have a final survey plat available hopefully within the next couple of weeks. And we plan to also meet locally with the people in that geographic area to discuss the final boundary plat. One other update I have is the co-op farming program. As many of you know, we do have cooperative farming on the refuge, and the objective of this program is to provide hot foods, grains such as standing corn for wintering waterfowl and green browse for tundra swans, and other wildlife benefits. Snow geese benefit, bears and deer also benefit for that. The way this program works is local farmers, we establish a 5-year contract, and they farm that land. It's a typical crop rotations. And they receive 80% of the harvest, and the rent that they leave the refuge is 20% in the form of standing corn or cover crop, which is the green browse, and usually winter wheat. That has been a very effective program in meeting our waterfowl energy days for the refuge. So we recently had to update our compliance documentation for that. And we redid a compatibility determination and environmental assessment for the cooperative farming program. And Sarah Toner and Kelly Van Druten were the leads on that very laborious effort. And that we just found out this week that both of those documents have been approved. The next step is Kelly and Sarah are going to be rolling out and advertise the next 5-year contract for the cooperative farming program. So you'll be hearing more about that at a later time. In regards to genetically engineered crops, the Fish and Wildlife Service conducted, at least our region, Southeast region, did a programmatic EA that's been approved. So the next step to permit GEC use on the refuge is to do an essentialist analysis. And that is going to be started probably this year. And I would defer to Sarah Toner if she has additional information on that. Sarah, do you want to add anything?
That's about where we're at. We're anticipating, we're going to be pursuing that essentialness test and looking into the option of allowing the use of GECs on the refuge, but that will be taking place sometime this fall or into next year.
Thank you, Sarah. And that's all I have for the updates.
Great, thank you, Wendy. We'll see if anybody has any questions about any of those updates. I was remiss in mentioning when Wendy introduced herself as acting refuge manager that Howard Phillips retired at the end of December. And prior to that, Greg Bowling, the deputy mayor, moved to a refuge complex in Florida earlier in 2020. And so we have been approved to fill the manager position at Pocosin Lakes. And so I am working on that. We're going to be working on advertising and filling that position, really focusing on, partnerships and a strong supervisor to step in and lead that staff and work across the landscape, building partnerships to really benefit regional efforts like we've been discussing tonight. So unfortunately, I would love to be introducing you to a new refuge manager tonight, but hopefully sometime in the near future. So that's one update I forgot to mention when we kicked off.
And again, if any of the landowners or anyone on this call, if they have questions or ideas, reach out to us. I am more than willing to come out and do site visits, and I know others on the staff as well. We are open to new ideas. Nothing is off the table with communication, so please feel free to reach out to us.
We'll pause for a second and see if any other questions pop up. I am not seeing anybody, and I know we are, we asked for your time right at the dinner hour. We really appreciate everybody's participation this evening. We do welcome continued questions. If you'd like to get out on the refuge and take a look at some things, we'd love to host you for that. So just reach out to us. We'll be following up by email with a number of things that Wendy mentioned. And we're always interested in meeting with folks and thinking about new ideas and looking for opportunities to improve. So thank you all, and we'll be talking soon. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everybody.